Hello, I'm Megan Lazovic, Vice President from Edison Research.
And I'm Lamar Johnson, VP of Sponsorship Marketing at National Public Media, the sponsorship subsidiary of NPR.
This is the fifth consecutive year of the Spoken Word Audio Report from NPR and Edison Research, and the third time I've had the pleasure of presenting this report with you, Lamar.
I know we go way back. We got a lot of history here, Megan. We'll be sharing updates to a lot of the key data points published every year in this report, but we're also looking at the data in ways we've never thought to look before.
Feel free to ask questions throughout this presentation in the Q&A box. We have people standing by to help. A recording of this webinar will be available to view shortly after we finish today. So if you're watching the replay or have any other questions after we wrap up, please reach out to us at info@edisonresearch.com.
And we encourage you to share what you learned today on social media. If you do, please use the hashtag #SpokenWordAudio. After this webinar, the full report will be available to download at npr.org/spokenwordaudio. That site also will give you access to reports and videos from our previously published studies.
Before we get to the data, here's a little bit about the report. The Spoken Word Audio Report pulls from Edison Research's Share of Ear, a quarterly report where we ask a nationally representative sample of Americans to keep a detailed one-day diary of their audio usage. We've been conducting Share of Ear since 2014, allowing us to observe changes in the audio space over time. One exciting change we have witnessed is that spoken word audio has grown significantly, as we will see today. With a substantial sample of over 4,000 people in the US aged 13 and older, we can look at the data in many different ways. This year, we are focusing on spoken word audio listening by location, reviewing data we haven't shown before.
Share of Ear asks panelists to record their listening to any type of audio. That could be music, news, sports, talk and personalities, or audiobooks. For the purposes of this report, anything that is not music is classified as spoken word audio.
Now, you could imagine that sifting through all of the data makes it really difficult to pick out the key findings, but that wasn't the case this year. These 5 findings really stood out in 2023.
First, spoken word audience size and listening time have attained record highs. Each year, we wonder if we'll see a decline in the amount of people who are listening or the amount of time spent with spoken word audio. We're happy to report that for 2023, more people than ever are listening and they're spending even more time with spoken word.
Next, the amount of spoken word listening at home has grown dramatically. As we mentioned earlier, this year we're focusing on changes in where people listen to spoken word audio. And that's partly because of this finding here. The growth in at home listening is just incredible.
Here's another location-based finding. Spoken word listening in the car has shifted post-pandemic, but AM/FM radio remains on top. There's a lot driving in-car listening, and we look forward to sharing more about that.
Here's a huge report highlight. Share of Ear has tracked the growth of mobile device listening over the past 9 years. But this is the first year it is the device that gets the most spoken word audio listening time. Time spent listening to spoken word on the mobile device now surpasses time spent with other established devices.
And finally, podcasting represents a large and growing share of spoken word listening. There's certainly a lot of reasons why we're witnessing an explosion in spoken word listening, but podcasts are most definitely the most significant factor.
Now, every year we've released this report, we've observed the growth of spoken word audio, and we weren't at all disappointed this year. We can report that spoken word audience size and listening time have once again attained record highs. Let's look at how much it has grown. In 2014, when we measured spoken word listening through Share of Ear, 39% of those in the US aged 13 and older were daily spoken word audio listeners. As you can see, it has proceeded to grow by a point every year or two. 9 years later, we can report that 48% of the US population listen to at least some spoken word audio every day.
Every year, we're a little closer to being able to report that half of the US population are daily spoken word audio listeners. That's truly incredible. Now we know there are already many brands and advertisers using spoken word audio as a key tool in their media strategy. And as reach grows, advertisers can use spoken word audio as more of a mainstream media channel. Here's how that daily reach translates into the number of Americans listening. There are an estimated 135 million daily spoken word audio listeners in the US today. That's 4 million more people listening today than just 1 year ago, and 30 million more people listening to spoken word audio each day than 9 years ago.
We're able to look at our respondents' audio diaries to see when exactly people are turning to spoken word. Let's see what listening looked like back in 2014. The orange portion of this graph represents the percent of those in the US who were listening to spoken word in each hour. Or if you're familiar with the terms, this would be the cume or reach of spoken word. We see that back in 2014, the greatest number of people listened to spoken word audio around the 7 a.m. hour. That's when about 12% of those in the US aged 13 and older are listening to spoken word. There is a smaller peak, but a clear second peak in the afternoon drive time around 5 p.m. Now, here's the 2023 data in dark blue. Every single hour has more listeners than it had in 2014. People are choosing to listen to spoken word in more parts of the day. There is still a large peak for spoken word consumption in the morning drive time, but in this post pandemic era, the afternoon drive time seems to have been flattened out over several hours. Even the drive time hours have grown at least a little. Every hour of the day has experienced growth. Notice in particular the large increases in the 10 a.m. hour and through the early afternoon.
So far, we've shown you the data by reach, or number of people listening to spoken word audio, overall and throughout the day. Now we'll show you how much time they're spending. And naturally, if listening grew in pretty much every hour, overall time spent with spoken word audio has increased, and spoken word's share of listening has grown as well. In 2014, 20% of all audio listening time went to spoken word audio. The other 80% of time was with music. But today, spoken word share is 31% of all audio time. That's a 55% increase in spoken word audio listening share over the last 9 years.
And here is one other point that shows the increasing centrality of spoken word content in so many people's lives. We saw a few minutes ago that now 48%, or just under half of all Americans aged 13 and older, are listening to at least some spoken word audio each day. And we just saw that 31% of all audio time is spent with spoken word. You can see that in the bar on the left side here. But on the right, we see what happens if we isolate this group. The half of all people who listen to at least some spoken word audio each day, they actually spend more time with spoken word than they do with music. Once people join the group of spoken word listeners, once they understand the magic that spoken word radio, podcasts, and audiobooks can provide, they give a lot of time to spoken word.
So now let's go back to this slide briefly to recall that overall, 31% of all audio time now goes to spoken word audio. Let's take a look at this percentage in each location. When people fill out their audio usage diaries, they tell us if they were doing their listening at home, in their workplace, in a car, or somewhere else, such as walking around, at the gym, or on public transportation. We see that share of listening that goes to spoken word is not the same in each location. If you look at all audio time reported in the home, there's even more time spent with spoken word. At 36% share, spoken word audio listening has the highest share at home. In the car, it's lower than the average across all locations. A quarter of in-car listening is with spoken word. At work, it's higher than average, but still 2 points behind at home. 34% of audio time at work goes to spoken word audio, and any other place has a much stronger music story, with 19% going to spoken word audio. but that quote unquote any other place represents a pretty small percentage of all listening. It would include places like going for a walk or going to the gym, locations of that nature.
So let's dig into location a bit more because it plays a significant role in when and how people engage with spoken word. We previously showed you spoken words share across all audio. Now, let's eliminate music listening and just look at how spoken word listening is split across locations. 60%, or the majority of all time with spoken word audio, is spent in the home. Second to that is in the car at 24%. The workplace gets 13% of spoken words audio time, and 3% of that time spent with spoken word audio happens in other locations.
Again, just looking at the time with spoken word audio, here it is across each location by platform. At home, 41% of spoken word audio time goes to AM/FM radio, and close behind that, 40% goes to podcasts. But in the car, spoken word on AM/FM radio dominates, earning 62% of spoken word's time. Podcasts' share is much smaller at 19%. However, podcasts have the largest share in the workplace at 45%, and a huge chunk of time elsewhere. 59% of spoken word audio time in other locations goes to podcasts.
This graph shows what device people use to listen to spoken word audio in each location. At home, an AM/FM radio, the tuner if you will, gets 30% of time with spoken word, and mobile device gets 41%. Surprisingly, internet connected TV surpasses both computer and smart speakers at 10%. These devices are already a hub for entertainment in the home, and it is interesting to see them being so heavily utilized for spoken word. In the car, the radio receiver dominates, much as Radio the Platform did as well. But just under a quarter of time spent with spoken word in the car is coming from a mobile device. And the mobile device dominates the remaining locations on this slide. 47% of time listening to spoken word audio at work is through a mobile device, and 80% of listening time to spoken word in other places is through a mobile device. That one makes total sense. Think about people going on walks, going to the gym, or moving anywhere throughout their day. Their mobile devices are always with them.
Now let's look at listening locations one more way. In addition to everything else, our respondents tell us if the content they consumed was news, talk and personalities, sports talk or play-by-play, or audiobooks. And as you can see, there are some differences. While talk and personalities has the largest share in all locations, you can see that news does the best in the car, sports at work, and in particular, audiobooks really do well in other locations, which makes sense. Think of people on public transportation or on long walks. Audiobooks probably fit well with those occasions.
Finally, let's look at the full day of spoken word listening. Earlier, we looked at the number of people listening to spoken word audio at every hour of the day. We'll do that again here, but this time we're looking at the number of people listening in each location. The red area here represents the number of people listening to spoken word at work. Work listening shows up on the chart primarily where you'd predict office hours, peaking in the 10 a.m. hour, where 2% of the US population is listening to spoken word audio at work. Now we'll layer on those listening in the car. In the car, listening peaks in the 7 a.m. hour, and you can see a long, somewhat drawn out afternoon drive time from 3 p.m. all the way to 7 p.m. Now, the blue area represents the number of people listening to spoken word at home. This takes up a lot of the chart because we know at home listening is the number one place for spoken word listening. At home listening peaks in the morning, but has a pretty significant number of people listening throughout the day.
We have established that the home is the primary location for spoken word listening, but this has not always been so clearly the case. Spoken word listening at home has grown dramatically over time, and there are a lot of factors at play. Let's explore that for a minute.
In 2019, 26% of at-home listening time went to spoken word audio. The remaining 74% spent with music. But listening time has shifted away from music over time. In 2020, spoken word audio listening in the home rose to 29%. Then it ticked up to 30% in 2021, 32% in 2022, and it is now up to 36% today. So we have really seen some striking increases in spoken word listening at home over the last several years.
We calculated the average amount of time spent listening to spoken word audio per day in the home. Now, since this is an average, that means we factored in all responses. There are people in the study who reported 0 at-home listening and others who reported several hours of at-home listening. But on average, in 2014, Americans aged 13 and older spent an average of 27 minutes listening to spoken word audio in the home. But in 2023, spoken word listening now averages 41 minutes in the home. That's an added 14 minutes, almost a quarter of an hour extra spent listening to spoken word in the home by every American every day.
Here's the percentage of the US population that is listening to spoken word audio at home each hour again. But this time, we can compare figures from this year to figures from 2014. In 2014, shown here in the light blue area of the chart, the mornings got the largest percent of people listening to spoken word in the home, with a second, smaller peak around 5 p.m. And then at home listening dips abruptly around the start of prime TV viewing hours, as one might expect. But look at what happens when we layer on the dark blue data from 2023. First, there are more listeners in every single hour. Second, there really isn't a singular second peak anymore. There isn't such a dip around the prime television hours. Why is that? Well, we know that appointment television viewing has decreased significantly. Far fewer people feel the need to watch shows as they are on the air. With on demand entertainment, people are choosing to consume entertainment when it's convenient to them. And perhaps this explains increased on demand audio in hours once almost exclusively used for television.
And what are people listening to at home? Their time is almost equally split with radio and podcasts at 41 and 40% respectively. We can break that radio number down between listening on a radio set versus listening to radio station streams. When we isolate over-the-air radio, we see it gets a 30% share, and by comparison, AM/FM streaming has 11% of spoken word audio time at home. That means that streams represent more than a quarter of spoken word radio listening at home.
Next, let's navigate through in-car listening. Spoken word listening in the car has shifted post-pandemic, but AM/FM radio remains on top. Here's the trending data. When we look at where people listen to spoken word, the car's share of spoken word audio has always been second to in the home. But look how that has changed over the years.
In 2014, 36% of spoken word audio listening time happened in a vehicle. By 2017, the car's share of spoken word dropped to 1/3. It remained in the low 30s until 2020, then look what happened. There's an obvious change here. The pandemic shifted behavior somewhat dramatically and the numbers dropped into the 20s. In 2021, 26% of spoken word listening was in the car, then 21% last year, and now 24% today.
We should not interpret that decline in cars' share of listening to mean there is much less in-car listening to spoken word. Let's look at the average minutes of listening. Earlier, we showed the average number of minutes listening to spoken word audio per day in the home, and we saw a huge increase. Here are the averages for spoken word audio listening in the car. In 2014, we calculated an average of 17 minutes of spoken word audio listening in the car. And 2023, 16 minutes. It is essentially the same. This absolutely coincides with what we saw in that last slide. As overall time with spoken word has grown, the share of spoken word is increasing in the home and decreasing in the car.
And what are people listening to in the car today? 62% of their time with spoken word audio in the car is spent listening to AM/FM radio. 19% is with podcasts, 6% with audiobooks, and 13% with other sources such as satellite.
We've done qualitative research on this subject throughout the years, and time again, we hear people echo the sentiment that radio and the car just go together. So clearly, radio still holds that dominant position in the car overall. But this year, we mark a real milestone in spoken word listening. For the first time ever, the mobile device is the primary way people listen to spoken word audio. As you can see at the top of this graph, when Share of Ear first measured listening in 2014, just 9% of spoken word audio listening was done on a mobile device. The overwhelming majority of spoken word listening was via an AM/FM receiver. 9% was on the computer, and we did pick up a little listening on internet-connected TVs at 1%. But look at how mobile, indicated here in red on the left, has grown since then. By 2019, 1/4 of all spoken word audio was through a mobile device, and it continued to grow through the pandemic years, with a big jump in just the last year. In 2023, now 39% of spoken word audio time happens on a mobile device, beating out AM/FM radio receivers for the first time ever. Keep in mind, as we saw earlier in the home, a good portion of AM/FM radio listening has shifted to digital streams, which may be accessed through that mobile device. We also see here that computer listening has remained mostly the same over time. But there's more listening on the board from other digital listening devices, such as the smart speaker at 4% and internet-connected TV at 7%.
So if digital listening is growing, then this last finding makes complete sense. Podcasting represents a large and growing share of spoken word listening. In 2023, podcast listening hit another all-time high. The Infinite Dial from Edison Research, Wondery, and Art19 tracks listening every year. This year, we learned that 64% of the US population has listened to a podcast.
And with more people than ever listening to podcasts, we're also witnessing an unprecedented time spent with podcasts. In 2014, 78% of time spent listening to spoken word audio was with AM/FM radio, and 13% of time was spent with podcasts. 9% of time was with other platforms, such as SiriusXM radio or audiobooks. Today, AM/FM radio still commands the most amount of spoken word listening time. However, podcasts have gained significantly. 36% of time spent with spoken word audio goes to podcasts in 2023. And as I pointed out earlier with AM/FM digital streams, we know radio content has found success in the podcast space as well. People are listening to their favorite shows on demand via podcasts.
That's right. NPR has seen the benefits of the growth in this space. 28% of the time spent listening to podcasts is with NPR or other public media producers. Some of our most popular titles are Up First, NPR News Now, and Planet Money, all of which are available daily. Partly due to the strength of its podcasts, NPR reaches a total of 44 million people weekly across platforms. And our radio and podcast audiences are fairly distinct, with only 9% of podcast users also using radio and only 14% of radio users also using podcasts.
We sifted through years and years of data, and while there were many stories to tell, we think these 5 findings really help define the state of spoken word audio in 2023. Number 1, spoken word audience size and listening time attain record highs. It has been growing by number of listeners every year since we published this report. And with more listeners comes more listening. Spoken word audio continues to be a great medium to reach people throughout the US.
The amount of spoken word listening at home has grown dramatically. With all the choices people have for information and entertainment at home, they are increasingly listening to spoken word audio throughout all parts of the day.
Spoken word listening in car has shifted post-pandemic, but AM/FM radio remains on top. Did listening behaviors change in car since the pandemic? Absolutely. But the shift to digital is at a slower speed in the car.
For the first time ever, the mobile device is the primary way people listen to spoken word. While mobile has been increasing steadily over the years, 2023 was the first year it overtook the AM/FM receiver for the #1 device used for spoken word listening. The use of other digital devices like the smart speaker or internet-connected televisions also chipped away at analog listening.
And finally, podcasting represents a large and growing share of spoken word listening. Podcasting now accounts for over 1/3 of the time spent with spoken word audio. The cultural shift to digital certainly benefits the space, or perhaps it's vice versa. The growing enthusiasm for podcasting is shifting the culture digital. Either way, podcast listening continues to grow. What do you think? Did we miss any important trends in spoken word audio in 2023? We'll stick around and answer questions in the Q&A box for the next few minutes, or you may reach out to us at info@edisonresearch.com if you have any questions.
Please visit npr.org/spokenwordaudio for our previous, current, and future spoken word audio reports. The slides you saw today are available on the site.
Thanks to everyone who helped prepare this report and webinar, and special thanks to you for joining us today. We'll see you next time.
Thanks. See you next time.
Bye.